Let's talk about federal laws, rules, and regulations that govern broadcast television. This is a pretty fascinating topic to me, and one that I think really speaks to the lack of media literacy that's present in a lot of people in today's world. What we're going to be talking about today are three very important terms: obscenity, indecency, and pornography, and specifically the role of the FCC in regulating all of that content. So we've got to start with a couple definitions. Pornography, don't worry, I'm not going to show you any. It's material designed specifically to incite some sort of sexual arousal. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, is it protected by the First Amendment? Yes, it is protected by the First Amendment, unless it's child pornography or a judge rules it as obscene. Now, what this means is that pornography is totally legal, and you can possess porn and you can enjoy it, I guess, whatever. As long as it's not child pornography or it's not obscene. Now, what do I mean by obscene? This is where things start to get really tricky. Obscene, a federal judge once famously described it as, "I'll know it when I see it." Now, the FCC has come up with a three-pronged test to determine if content is, in fact, obscene. And their language here is, the average person applying contemporary community standards believes that the content, number one, appeals to the prurient interests. Now, what that means is that it's some sort of aberrant sexual behavior or something really, really disgusting. We also see content that shows or describes sexual matter in some sort of an offensive way. That's another test. And the content lacks serious artistic, literary, scientific, or political value. That's the definition of obscene content. And when we think about whether this type of content is protected by the First Amendment, the answer is no. And what that means is that obscene content is technically illegal in a way. It's something that is not going to hold up in court if you argue that you have a right to share and distribute obscene content. That's actually not true. The First Amendment does not protect obscene content. So for this reason, it's rare that you see any courts rule content as truly obscene. Most of the time, the content is not going to technically be obscene, even if colloquially we say that the content is obscene because it is so horribly offensive. I'm also not going to show you any examples of what could be considered obscene content. If you need more advice or guidance on that, let me know. We'll start a separate discussion. Now, indecent content we actually deal with quite a bit. Indecent's kind of somewhere in the middle. This is language or material that portrays some sort of sexual or excretory organs in an offensive way as measured by the contemporary community standards. We actually do see indecent content quite a bit on television, and it is subject to federal regulation. Not censorship, but regulation. That means that the government has some pretty strict rules in place about when it's okay for a broadcaster, either radio or television, to air indecent content. Indecent content is protected by the First Amendment. That means you're not going to get into some sort of legal trouble for saying something indecent. You just might get fined by the FCC. Now, for broadcast, all obscene material is completely banned. It's actually against the law to have obscene material on broadcast television or radio. Cable and satellite companies, a little bit different, right? Because they're not subject to government regulation since they are private enterprises. So technically, you could have obscene content on cable and satellite channels, as well as streaming capabilities too. Indecent material, if it's aired on broadcast, can earn a fine or a reprimand, kind of like a slap on the hand. But really, what we see most of the time, even when the FCC levies a fine on a media organization or an individual, it's rare that someone actually ends up paying money for it. I'll get to a couple examples here in a second. The FCC was actually once instructed by Congress to ban all indecent material from the airways. That didn't exactly work out so well. We can probably understand why. Shows all the time air material that is deemed indecent, and nothing really happens as a result. So that kind of bordered on censorship, and that didn't exactly hold up. Now, we do have a law called the Safe Harbor Law from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's the broadcast channel's safe harbor. which means they won't necessarily get fined for indecent content on the airwaves during that time. That's because they assume most children are in bed or asleep from 10 to 6 a.m. They're probably not watching content. And really, when we talk about indecent material, aren't we really most concerned about the children? We're not really as concerned about the adults seeing it. We're worried about protecting our wonderful, sweet children from terrible, indecent content. Remember, the FCC isn't the one who's making these laws. They just interpret them and apply them, and they are the authority agency that has the ability to levy fines. So let's see what this might look like. And the internet, I do have to mention a little bit about the Child Online Protection Act, which was pretty ineffective. It's no longer in existence. It required age confirmation before letting minors into sites. Guess what happened? Minors who wanted to see content online that they weren't legally supposed to just lied about their age, and no one could really do anything about it. Now we have the Children's Internet Protection Act, which essentially says that libraries must block access to porn sites so that, again, precious children's eyes won't be seeing content they shouldn't see. There are some potential First Amendment issues with this. I know it's a stretch, but think about it this way. If you are a researcher and you need to access something in the library on the library computer, and let's say your research area is in like human sexuality, you might stumble upon a site or need to get to a site that deals with sexual content, but that's not really porn, and the library might block it from you, so you can't access it. So there are some potential access issues here. They don't come up too often, but that's really the gist of what we're doing to protect kids. Now, if we look at indecent, obscene, or porn material, I've got a couple good examples. We probably all remember the Janet Jackson Super Bowl Justin Timberlake fiasco from 2004. The FCC actually received over 500,000 complaints about seeing Janet Jackson's nipple for 9/16 of a second, and what they ended up deciding is that both performers were acting as independent contractors for the limited purpose of providing entertainment for one brief program, and eventually the fines were dropped, so no one actually ended up paying anything for that one particular act. You might also remember the Miley Cyrus Justin Thicke performance at the VMAs, Indecent, Obscene, or Porn. Guess what? Doesn't really matter, because this was on MTV, which is a cable station, so the FCC couldn't do anything about it. But for the benefit of all of us here, the Freedom of Information Act has made readily available a lot of the FCC complaints, and they are highly entertaining. A lot of people wrote in and said that this particular situation was obscene. And to support it, the FCC heard comments like she was licking the butt of a stuffed bear. I didn't edit these for grammar or spelling. Humped him, as you can see there, touched the genitals of an older man while performing music. God help this nation was one of the complaints. Made me kind of laugh. Acting like a devil, flicking that tongue as demons do. Engaged in implied sexual acts with bears. May have been okay in a strip club. Robin Thicke should be banned for 5 years. Again, these comments are highly entertaining, and people were really taking this pretty seriously. Guess what? FCC can't do anything about content that aired on MTV. So all these people who complained to the FCC, those comments fell on deaf ears. If you ever have a complaint about something on cable or satellite or streaming, you basically have to go to that cable station, you have to go to the content producers, and you really have to figure out a way to get their advertisers to pull out from sponsoring those shows. That's really the only recourse you have as a consumer if you're watching something you disagree with on cable or satellite. South Park is an issue all of its own. The one clip I generally use in class when explaining this is there's one particular episode called Gingivitis, where Cartman gives a speech about how evil redheaded children are, and it's a pretty terrible scene. Not anywhere near the worst scene we've seen in South Park, but it is pretty terrible. And there are a couple of FCC comments posted here. Again, they did no good, because South Park airs on Comedy Central, and that is a cable network. It is not a broadcast network, so you're paying for this content. You can see some of the comments there that came to the FCC. So it's always important to consider this type of content. I would say that what you see on South Park is most likely indecent. I don't ever recall seeing straight up pornography on South Park. There are a couple scenes in South Park which could border on obscene depending on the extremity of them, but most of the content we see is indecent. So keep those all in mind, and especially the role of the FCC in regulating this content the next time you watch broadcast and cable television.